Stephen A. Smith, who has a way about him, and hyperbole is the first language of sport, so we'd never knock that. Ben Simmons might actually be the weakest, most pathetic excuse for a professional athlete in the history of sport. I don't know where we go from there. That we have maxed out. Nathan Buckley, good morning.
How are you, Gerard? There's no further comment to be made beyond that. That's as scathing as it gets, isn't it?
Does that sit okay with you?
I don't know. You're not close enough to it. I'm not close enough to it, and I can't say that I read it close enough. But I know enough about it to have queries around, what is going on in that young man's life, the pressure that he must feel that he's under, but then obviously to disenfranchise two separate organisations and then a whole league with your actions over the course of, what's it been, 12 or 18 months. Has been pretty consolidated, and the commentators and the people that are making the commentary, like Stephen A. Smith, who, as you said, has a style, and it is to be gregarious and to go to the outlier comments to make definitive statements. That's as strong as you'll hear.
See, Kane's not trying hard enough. That's my takeout is Kane's not trying hard enough.
Look, well, what I would say there is I'm glad he said athlete.
Yes.
Because it's very...
And professional athlete.
Professional athlete. Because you're getting paid to do something. So if you're getting paid to do something, well, then you deserve scrutiny for what your output is towards an organisation or towards a team or towards a game or towards a season or a career based on what people believe they should expect from you as a professional athlete. The difficulty is, from the outside in, is to separate that from the judgment of the person. When you're inside an organisation, you actually are really trying to separate the respect and care for the individual at all times, but then to be able to challenge the professional. It's pretty hard to do from the outside in. And I think that they are, those comments like that, and I've been on the receiving end as a player and as a coach, they're very difficult to comprehend and to when they hit you, it hits you as in your essence as a person often, without being able to separate it yourself and see it as a professional comment. Because they're quite personal comments, even though he said professional athlete.
Is there one line or headline that lives with you?
No, the anecdote. The one story I have is was a Mike Sheehan article, and I've spoken to Mike about this quite a bit. He said that Paul, it'd be similar to viewing North Melbourne or Essendon last week. His comments were that myself and Paul Williams didn't look like we cared, like we were running around not giving our best, and we didn't look like we cared. I reckon I was about 24, 25 at the time. It was mid-90s. I'd been at the club to Collingwood for 2 or 3 years. It was about my 3rd or 4th AFL season. The irony of that is that through Gubby Allen, I'd actually borrowed Mike's house down at Sorrento about a month before that, and I bought him a bottle of Petaluma to say thank you, and I still had it. I hadn't had a chance to give it across to him. I read that article and I was a little bit upset at it. It was a really nice drop. I just decided, well, that's not going to get to its destination, and we've laughed about it since. But it is very, and I was scarred by that. I was really stung by that commentary, and it was one line in a paper, about 3 pages in it. But you absorb things like that because I really care about, at that point more so, cared so much about how I was viewed as a footballer. But I couldn't separate how I was viewed as a footballer from how I was viewed as a person, as a young man. They were the same thing. So when I played a bad game, I was a bad bloke. Yep. If I played a great game, I'm a good bloke. It's as stupid as it sounds, or worthy. More not good bloke, bad bloke, but just worthy. And it's a difficult lesson to learn, and you often learn it the hard way.
Okay, so that's the Simmons scenario. The Kyrgios scenario is really interesting. Steve Carfino, who's a really thoughtful, much-loved figure in basketball, he really wanted to say that last night. Is it so the etiquette of all-star celebrity games, is it possible Nick Kyrgios cared more about his performance there than he does on a tennis court?
Well, that's the disappointment of the whole thing. I've actually tried to defend. I mean, look, let's say we're talking about Allen Iverson. Like we're talking about practice. Like we're talking about a celebrity game.
Yep.
But so it's supposed to have its own feel, and that is fun, enjoyment. Everyone gets involved, contribution, and there's people from all different walks of life and are raising money. So, but what the feeling is, I guess, is that Nick Kyrgios went out and was the only bloke that wasn't feeling it. So he tried harder in the celebrity game than he's prepared to try in a professional game of tennis at times. That is the irony. And I've tried to sit back and watch him, and he's a different character. And I think some of the things that he does is great. But I don't know Steve Carfino at all, but from what I do know, he seems to be quite a zen, measured guy who's looking out for others. And if he has been moved to make that comment publicly, then it may just carry some weight.
Amazing where you can find yourself on a Wednesday morning. The footy. So there are two clubs who are now improvising: Collingwood and Carlton, with their ruck stocks.
There's 18 clubs. Well, maybe 17 clubs improvising.
Yep.
In Melbourne, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, we're going to get to that shortly. What do we know? Just the first on the overall of the PCL injury for the ruckman, which has been, it was previously a scourge. There's been a few different goes at trying to limit it, not the least of which is the technique of ruckman. So there's rules, there's painting on the grounds, and then there's the technique of ruckman. What's your first thought around two knee clashes which are going to cost Brodie Grundy and Mark Pitnett 3 months of their season?
Well, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that you're the premier sports reporter, commentator in the country, and I'm a recently retired ex-player and coach who played as a midfielder. We're not the people to be discussing what happens in a ruck contest.
Yep. Which is, it was interesting. Corey McKernan on Sunday, so after one and before the second, he raised the alarm on this. Yeah, he's lived it, he's seen it, he knows it, and he was worried about essentially the relapse of technique. To knee to knee. And
that had disappeared with changes to the centre bounce. So the circle being brought in, the Jeff White rule, and apparently Neil Danaher had pushed for that because of the prospect of injury. So that you reduce the number of steps, but then you just get better at that. You get 1, 2, bang. Like you got these guys that are training and preparing for that exact ballistic movement to get up as high as they possibly can to win a hit out. I think the big one for me, and this, as I said, with the context of not ever being in that position, the big one for me was the line across. And we've done that. As soon as the line goes across and you cannot go to the other side of the circle, well, then you're actually asking for it to be a combative 180 degree will meet you straight on, or even on an angle. But you've taken away a lot of the options to a ruckman who might be a good body player, and we're actually penalising ruckmen that now body. So I don't know what the answer is. What I would say also is you can't legislate every contact out of the game. This is a contact game of footy. I said it yesterday morning about Paddy McCartan. Paddy McCartan knows exactly what's going on. He's made a choice. He's going to be collected in the head periodically, and he's going to have heavy body knocks. And he has made a choice, his own choice, to put his hand up to play this game. So we shouldn't be surprised if something spins out of that at some point, because it's a contact game of footy. You cannot take every contact out of the game. So I don't know what the answer is with the PCLs.
So Scott Pendlebury's tweeted, with the PCL injuries from Ruck, is it time to look at the centre bounce and changing it? So he's gone straight to it. Is it that challenge is there? Does it need to be changed? It has been interesting that they've manoeuvred. I think ruckmen have sort of cleverly manoeuvred themselves for the most part away from the knee to knee over a series of years. But it does look like, I don't know whether it's a relapse or a coincidence. 2 in 3 days will do that. And Nick Natanui, I think, is out with a PCL as well, so from a separate one. Yeah.
Well, the other one is the other one is the other things that you can't do. So that being able to use your hands, like we used to see the knee go up and the arm go up, and then maybe create a little bit more space for the offhand to do the hit out. So you're sort of jumping through and past the ball. But then there was a lot of free kicks being given against the ruckman who used his hand. So then you take the hand away. The only contact point is the knee.
Yep.
Or the guts, and you're not going to want to do that. So you use your knee to protect yourself. This is the same way that a player going for a high mark uses his leading leg as a protective mechanism as much as a lever to get higher. So there are some real queries here, and like we analyse the game more than we ever have before. We look at it closer than we ever have before. We see and because we do, we see the things that aren't right with it more so. The game's loses some of its mystique because of how much we analyse it, but we're trying to make it as fair as possible and not have players missing big chunks of seasons because of maybe the rules that could be a little bit different and tweaked to improve their capacity to stay on the field.
How big a loss do you think Mark Pitnet is for Carlton?
I think he's been exceptional in this early stage of the year, and that was the warm-up games as well. He's a combative player. I get the sense that he's a bit of a quirky type off-field, and that sort of energy and confidence and different perspective of looking at things, I think that's going to serve Carlton well on and off the field. But I love his combativeness, and I think he loves to play as a big man. He's relatively aggressive. He jumps into contests hard. He puts his head in the hole when he needs to. He goes back with a flight when he needs to. So I think that sort of attitude around a football team in those moments in matches when you need someone to do that, I think that he's someone that has risen to that challenge as he's not a young ruckman. He's been around for a while, but I think he's sensing that he's got some ownership of what's going on there. So that's going to hurt them in the short term. But I think he's a lock to be someone who's going to have a lot of impact going forward.
And Grundy, his absence at Collingwood, how significant do you think that is?
Well, when you wrap that up with Kruger, it's a massive challenge because there are two. Obviously Darcy Cameron is a proficient ruckman, more than proficient ruckman. He's a better ruckman than he is a forward. So he's been playing as the second ruck behind Brodie. But there have been times when his ruck form has been better than Brodie's in the last sort of 18 months, 2 years. So I think that we will see him come of age. I think that the football community will see something in Darcy Cameron that has always been there, but we haven't been exposed to as much. So I think they'll be okay there. Like, that's not to say that Brodie won't be lost or that it won't be a loss to Collingwood, but I think the ruck will be right. Obviously Mason Cox comes back into the frame as a tall forward. There's not a lot of options there. So if you miss another one, well then you're playing quite small. And look at the Richmond sides, the Richmond forward lines, and Fly's been there for a while. So you might actually be able to ratchet up the pressure and make something of that because as long as the back six stays intact and the defensive mechanisms are solid, you'll turn the ball over in the front half and the big fellas might not be as relevant.
Coming into the season, you're trying to find your place. You do all the work internally, you get a couple of measures against oppositions, and we often talk to coaches about, do you know where you'll be or are you feeling your way through? 6 rounds? That's a lot of evidence. It's more than a quarter of the season. I've had John Laws kicking around in my head.
They know.
They know. They know. Would there be... You don't have to give me a number. How many coaches would know now? They know their fate, either for better or for worse after 6 games.
There's knowing and then there's accepting.
Okay. And
none
rage against
of
accepting.
them would accept at this point because I think the senior coach has to be the last bastion of hope. He needs to be the last bloke to give up on the game, the contests, the month, the season. I think that his job is to always find a way and to believe that you're going to win from wherever. I think that's the primary responsibility of the role.
What if that's delusional? Is that okay?
Sometimes I would suggest sometimes it needs to be, but it needs to be a demented type we can win, or this is. I think that needs to be a part of it, but I don't think there's anything I still don't think there's anything delusional after round 6, because we talk about mathematically possible. Well, anything is possible. Well, anything's possible. But we know North aren't going to make the finals and are struggling.
So North Melbourne.
They know.
Yeah. So David Noble knows that he's trying to bring his players back to how can we execute a consistent brand for 4 quarters in one game, let alone putting a block of form together. So he's looking at that. West Coast, they've just been smashed from pillar to post. They've had the worst off-season of all. They've really struggled to get their players back together. They looked okay for the first 2 or 3 weeks when there was a bit of energy. Now the reality set in, so they know.
They know.
They know. And they're gonna they're gonna really struggle just to maintain their energy and their hope in this next period. But the next 3 or 4 weeks is something that Adam Simpson would be saying. We put 3 or 4 good weeks together, boys, or we flick a switch here and we don't know. If we've got to get back to square as quickly as we can. And they might not ever be able to do that this year. Essendon have played some good teams, but they've missed opportunities to win games that they've been in. And I don't know whether they would be prepared to give up on the year. We look at you look at Port Adelaide. So Port Adelaide have now gone from 0-5 up to 14th at 1-5, and they're 93 or 94%. Their percentage is only 1% off Adelaide, but we have a very different view because of expectation leading into the year of where Adelaide's season is with 3-3 and some really close games, with Port Adelaide at 1-5, but they're only 8 points away, and there's still 16 rounds of the season left.
Yeah, so Port Adelaide are duty bound to rage against it.
Absolutely.
And have some cause to believe that they could restore it. I know that I heard you speak last week about Ken Hinkley was criticised for being the last bastion of hope. And you go, my God, if you're giving up after 5 rounds, you should be tiptoed out of the building.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an easy question to answer because there's so much time. It's like it's like you're a couple hundred metres into a marathon. Well, not you're a couple of Ks into a marathon. There's still a lot of football to be played. There's still a lot of ebbs and flows that can take place. And you might not be hitting it out of the park, but you can grind out wins. But you do need to change. One thing that you would have to accept as a senior coach is the way we're doing it isn't going to get us to where we want to be. So what do we need to change and what do we need to shift? But I'd say that, as I said, most clubs are in that position. How do we find our best footy? So St Kilda at the moment, they've gone mining, found a nice little thread of gold, and then they're just seeing how far they can mine that little slither of gold for this moment in time. And it might open up into the biggest nugget they'll ever find, like Melbourne have done. Or it might lead nowhere, and then they have to start again. And that's largely how I would see the evolution of a season. And it's the coach's job and the coaching panel's job to set the direction on how they find that. Above them is the list manager and the footy manager. Now, they're the checks and balances for delusion of the senior coach. They're the ones that say, they'll pull at the coattails and say, look, I know you've got your head in the trough here, but we need to have a look, lift our eyes and have a look a little bit further at this. And that's where the relationship and communication of those roles in particular is critical.
So if the coach is the last bastion of hope and it's the football manager's role and the list manager's role to be the checks and balance on delusion, if you're the Giants, they're 1-5.
They know.
What's the obligation of the football administration now to figure out what it looks like next?
Yeah, so what the Giants would know is that the way that they have tried to play is not winning games of footy. So, and I've seen the Giants in late 19, they had plenty of players out and they beat us in that prelim. And by that point, they had established for the 5 or 6 weeks leading in a really heavily, workmanlike, contested ball, even up numbers, make it a grind style that had that they'd ridden through the back half of 19 or the back third of 19 and into a grand final. So I've seen evidence of GWS, more so Leon Cameron and his coaching staff and the players, to have the capacity to grind their way out of situations and find a different way. So I think he has that capacity as a coach, and I think their football department has that capacity. Now, whether they have the wherewithal and the ability or the soldiers to be able to do it, we'll find out. But the bigger picture now is, so if there's no guarantee that the coach is going on, then potentially the list manager and the football manager and the CEO have a bit stronger role in the key decisions that are being made around whether it's for the now or for the future.
And that marries up, as I know you asked about it yesterday, we've been referencing it for a couple of weeks. The parallels are unmissable with some of your circumstance from last year. What's the humane way to approach this for a long-serving coach?
Open and honest conversations, and as soon as it becomes evident which way either party are going to go, you need to put that on the table. So for me, it was a really open and honest conversation with Graham Wright, and I felt it stung. It absolutely stung, because I was probably the last to want to let go. Like, you sort of believe that you're always capable, but the appetite or the environment for change was undeniable, and I thought I was just treated remarkably well by Righty as an individual in that circumstance. So the relationship that I had with him was important, and we'd played together way back, had sort of drifted apart when he went on his path and I was on mine, and we'd only been back together for a short period of time. But the way he handled that was with ultimate respect and for betterment of the club. And I think that's, so if it had come from the other way, so if it had been me deciding that as well, then it would be my duty to have that conversation with the club. And when I say have the conversation with the club, it's with the footy manager. It's with one person who can then use that information. You share that information together, and then you work out what are we going to do from here for what's right for the footy club.
Does the round number play any role in that? So you were pretty well smack bang in the middle of the year.
I think it does, because you've got to consider, you've got to believe that your season is done, and so you need to know that your season is done and that it is irretrievable before I think you decide to move on. I think that from that season, that's whether you've got a coach that's in contract or whether you haven't. And it might be slightly different with different circumstances of contracting for a senior coach or a list manager or even a football manager. That we don't talk about the contracting of football managers, but that's a reality as well. And they're very, very important managers or influences on football departments and therefore on what happens on field. But the time of the year is important, is crucial, because you've got to be moving forward all the time.
So whether it's the idea of not wasting weeks and games.
No, you've got to be moving forward all the time. And so you've got to take every opportunity. Every session counts. Every game counts. Every quarter counts. So if you're 10 goals down at three-quarter time, you need to find something in the last quarter that you can build on, that you can improve with. And you need to keep surging forward, because if you're treading water, you're going backwards. So whether it's the senior coach, whether it's a player or an individual, a young guy that's coming up, everything is golden. You've got to have that respect for the moment.
Okay, so a lot of that is the teams that find themselves in the lower portion, and there's a team right at the top. We know, and
they know.
So what is Simon Goodwin working with at the moment with 6 weeks worth of evidence?
They've already put it on the table that they're not playing exactly how they want to play. Like, their back half movement's been exceptional, and one of the ironies of that is you can't get a front half game if your connection is so good that you score and it goes back to the centre bounce. it's sort of all your numbers, and one of the reasons why their front half turnover numbers might be down is because they're so efficient when they go inside and they just score, and then the ball goes back, and then you play it out a little bit. The opposition, generally, if you're winning clearances by say 55 to 45, then that's a smashing. So you're generally going to be 50-50 in clearance, even with the midfield that they have. But I think that he's finding different challenges, different opportunities, different awarenesses, understanding and living in the moment and being grateful for where they are and not taking it for granted. And I think that's what they did exceptionally well, even towards the end of last year. And I think that's why they were able to handle times when they were down in games. They just had such a belief in who they were and how they were going to go about it, and were grateful about the opportunities that they were finding themselves in and the growth that they'd taken. So it's not done. Like there'll be something sitting on their shoulder saying, look, nothing that's happening now is really of consequence. What's going to matter is when we get to the win or lose games of September, and we've just got to keep preparing ourselves for that. And so but they've got to enjoy the moments now, and I think Simon would be coaching that.
Craig's gone the whole way with his word association. He's gone Melbourne, Monties, Freo, finally winning on the road. Brisbane will play Melbourne in the grand final, so taking the suspense out of it, Craig. St Kilda flicked a switch. Sydney, always in the contest. Geelong, flat track bullies. Carlton, the great pretenders. Collingwood, break-even season. Hawthorn, building. Adelaide, overachieving. Bulldogs, underachieving. You've got quite a knack for this, Craig. Well done. Richmond, looking for Dusty. Gold Coast, nobody cares, same. Port, stale. GWS, star-studded with no DNA. Essendon, believed the hype, didn't bring it. West Coast, stubborn list management. North, second-year blues. Nice, Craig. Well done.
Get him a segment.
Yes, you should keep that updated as we go along. Two individuals. So Erin Phillips first.
Yeah.
So you sent me a photo a few weeks back, just ahead of the grand final that she was playing, of a Port Adelaide. It was a Port Adelaide premiership photo, and there was just a little girl in the corner of it.
Yeah, and she was 7 at the time, and she found her way onto the field, and in this the photo of the team as we were doing our lap, and Coochie, Greg Phillips, was lied across the front with the cup. And Erin was just standing up there on the left. So yeah, she's been around. Like at that point, the Phillips owned the Lighthouse Tavern.
Yep,
I think it was called the Lighthouse Tavern, right in the middle of Port Adelaide. And we used to see the family are obviously heavily involved in the club. So to see to know that this little girl who loved her sport, loved her footy, and obviously, loved all sports, and then has gone on to do such great things in many different areas of the sporting landscape is remarkable. And now she finds herself back to Port Adelaide.
It's a beautiful sense of timing that before she finishes, she gets to fulfil this last part.
Yeah, well, that's where she started, and it's who knows what she's got in front of her. She's a beast. She's obviously mentally and emotionally strong and driven and balanced emotionally, from what I can gather. Just has the right perspective on life and where the sport fits for her. But yeah, she's she'll take her energy and her drive back to where it all started.
And the other one is Jack Ginnivan, who's such a figure. So I think it's amazing that a pick 13 in a rookie draft 2 years ago could have become such a large figure on our landscape in 10 games. 10
games. I was thinking earlier, the only other guy that I reckon has been speculated on as often at this stage was Darren Cuthbertson. And I was in Melbourne. I was a Melbourne supporter, and he just came on with a bang, and he was an undersized forward and kicked a lot of goals. And I don't know if he wasn't speculated on for the off-field stuff or for getting a word wrong here or there, though, or for his attitude. But geez, 10 games, and he's to win an Anzac Day medal in your 10th game that's pretty exceptional. We don't get that very often. I think Mark McGough won it in his second.
He did.
And I think Andrew Lovett might have been in his first handful of games for Essendon as well. And those games, they just stand out, don't they? So he's done well. He's put his name up in lights, and he's part of the landscape now. Where everyone will be looking for him.
So he was on with us last night on 360 as the Rising Star nominee, and if you watched him, you just had to love him. Clearly, he's always loved his footy. He told the great story as he kicked 100 goals when he was 11. And he played against Denali one day, and he kicked 15 to half time. So his dad made him go and play for Denali in the second half.
Could have been 120.
Just clearly in love with the game. The experience is enormous for him, and he's, I would say, unfiltered.
Yeah.
Sort of beautifully unfiltered.
It's raw.
Yeah.
And what do you expect out of, I think one of the reasons he's unfiltered is because he hasn't come through the system.
Yep.
Now, a lot of the guys that are going to be maybe a top 10 or a top 20 draft pick, they go through an academy process, and there's some smoothing of rough edges that happens through this. And that's sometimes that's for better, and sometimes we lose some of the character or we get the capacity to put this mask on and the real person sits in behind. But we know it when we see someone that is truly honest and absolutely authentic to themselves. We see that when it comes out, and we feel it more to the point. And Jack, I don't know, I've been talking about it. Like, this is the kid he is, and he's going to get a word wrong every now and then, and he's going to get ahead of himself he's been an undersized player who's he's just been a combative young fella who's just tried to make the most of his assets and attributes, and always believed that he was capable if he could only be given the chance. And he's taking that path.
So we're drawn to him in a way that we're drawn to the high draft picks because they're so heralded. So we've seen Nick Dacos come through, we've seen Horn Francis come through, and I'm totally drawn to Rochelle and the idea that he's driving around the streets of Adelaide in his Merc and whatnot. This is just a different way of coming to it. Yeah. Anyway, he's enriched our footy world quickly. It's not an easy thing to do.
And we see that in young players. Like, there's a lot of focus on them when they come in, and for different reasons. And we put them on a pedestal before they've even got the capacity to do what we expect them to do, and then we judge them for it. So it's a really tough position to be in when you're an early pick. It's a really tough position to be as a 10-game player who's been a late pick, but then is being perceived as something that, that may or may not be true. And he's just a young man who's trying to work himself out as well in amongst this glare and spotlight that he's now in the middle of, and loving it.
Yes.
But he's still trying to work it out for himself. And he's going to fall over, he's going to stub his toe, he's going to skin his knee and make mistakes and rub people up the wrong way, but at least he's trying to do it authentically.
Yep. Bucks, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Joe.
Nathan Buckley on a Wednesday this week, typically on a Tuesday as we settle back in without public holiday games from here.